Margaret Hayes had been a nanny for 32 years. She had cared for colicky babies, willful toddlers, and teenagers who thought they knew everything. But when she arrived at the Anderson residence on a bright September morning, she sensed this assignment would be different. The home was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and warm sunlight spilled across polished wooden floors. Robert Anderson, a distinguished man in his early 40s with touches of gray at his temples, greeted her at the door. His handshake was firm, but Margaret noticed the weariness in his eyes. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Hayes," he said quietly. "I should be honest with you. 7 nannies have already left. They all said the same thing, that my son is difficult." Margaret simply nodded. In her 3 decades of childcare, she had learned that every child was just trying to be understood. Mr. Anderson led her through the elegant home. "My son's name is Daniel. He's 7 years old. After my wife passed away 2 years ago, he stopped talking. Completely. The doctors say there's nothing physically wrong with him. They call it selective mutism. But it's been 2 years now, and not a single word." They found Daniel sitting cross-legged on the floor of the living room, bathed in golden afternoon light. He was a beautiful child, with dark hair that fell across his forehead, and the kind of thoughtful eyes that seemed much older than 7. He wore a blue sweater over a collared shirt. When Margaret entered, he didn't look up. "Daniel," his father said gently, "this is Mrs. Hayes. She's going to spend time with you while I'm at work." The boy remained silent, focused on the toy car he was rolling slowly back and forth across the floor. Mr. Anderson's shoulders sagged slightly. "You see?" he whispered. "He won't even acknowledge you're here." But Margaret had seen something else. As she'd approached, Daniel's hands had moved in a specific way, just a brief gesture almost hidden. It was subtle, but after 32 years of watching children, Margaret noticed everything. That evening, after Mr. Anderson left for a business dinner, Margaret sat down on the floor, a respectful distance from Daniel. She didn't try to talk to him or take away his toy. She simply sat, quiet and patient, as the sunset painted the room in shades of amber and rose. After 20 minutes, Margaret raised her hand and made a simple gesture. The sign for hello. Daniel's head snapped up. For the first time, his eyes met hers. They were wide with surprise and something else. Hope, perhaps. Margaret smiled and signed again. "Hello, my name is Margaret." Daniel stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly his small hands moved. "You know sign language?" "Yes," Margaret signed back. "My daughter was born deaf. I learned to sign before she could even sit up." What happened next made Margaret's heart swell. Daniel's face transformed. The guarded, distant expression melted away, replaced by the brightest smile she had seen on any child in years. His hands began to move rapidly, eagerly. "Nobody ever understands me," he signed. "I try to tell them things, but they don't see. They just keep talking and talking, and I can't make the words come out of my mouth anymore. Not since Mommy died." Margaret nodded slowly, her own hands responding with gentle assurance. "I understand. Sometimes words get stuck, but you've been communicating all along, haven't you? Just in a different way." "The other nannies got angry," Daniel signed. "They said I was being difficult. They said I was rude. But I was trying. I tried to tell them I was hungry or sad or that I wanted to show them something. They never saw." That night, Margaret stayed late. When Mr. Anderson returned home at 9 o'clock, he found his son animated in a way he hadn't seen in 2 years. Daniel was signing enthusiastically about his day, and Margaret was signing back, both of them smiling. "What? What's happening?" Mr. Anderson asked, bewildered. Margaret turned to him with kind eyes. "Your son has been trying to communicate this whole time. Mr. Anderson, he's been using sign language." Mr. Anderson's face went pale. "Sign language, but no one in our family is deaf. Where would he have learned sign language?" Margaret signed the question to Daniel, and the boy's hands moved in response. Margaret translated. "He says he learned it from a girl at school. Her name was Emma, and she was deaf. They became friends last year before your wife passed. Emma taught him sign language during recess. After his mother died and Daniel stopped speaking, sign language became his voice. It was the only way he could still express himself." Mr. Anderson sank into a chair, overwhelmed. All this time I thought he was shutting me out. I thought he didn't want to talk to me. The therapist said to be patient, to give him space. I never knew he was trying to communicate. He was, Margaret said softly. He was speaking. We just weren't listening in the right way. Over the following weeks, something remarkable happened. Margaret taught Mr. Anderson sign language. Every evening, father and son would practice together. At first, the conversations were simple. How was school? I'm hungry. I love you. But gradually, something deeper unfolded. Daniel began to share things he'd kept locked inside for 2 years. Through his moving hands, he talked about his mother, about how much he missed her, about how afraid he'd been that his father was so sad he might disappear too, about the nightmares that still woke him at night. And Mr. Anderson, his own hands still clumsy with the new language, shared his grief too. He told Daniel how much he missed Mommy, how hard it had been to come home to a quiet house, how scared he'd been that he was failing as a father. One evening in November, as the three of them sat together in the living room with the city, lights twinkling outside, Daniel's hands moved in an unexpected way. He signed something, and then, for the first time in 2 years, he spoke it aloud. Dad. The word was barely a whisper, rusty from disuse, but it filled the room like music. Mr. Anderson's eyes filled with tears. Daniel, you're speaking? Daniel nodded, still signing as he spoke, as if the two languages together gave him confidence. I'm ready to use my voice again, but only because you learned my language first. Margaret, wiping her own eyes, understood the profound truth in what this child was saying. He had needed to know he was heard before he could risk being vulnerable again. He needed to know his father would meet him where he was, would make the effort to understand. Before he could find the courage to speak, Mr. Anderson pulled his son into a tight embrace. Over Daniel's shoulder, he mouthed 2 words to Margaret. Thank you. But Margaret shook her head gently and signed so Daniel could see. I didn't do anything. I just paid attention. In the months that followed, Daniel began speaking more regularly, but he never stopped signing. It had become part of who he was. This beautiful second language, that had been his lifeline in the darkest time of his young life. Margaret stayed with the Anderson family for 2 more years. She taught Daniel's father that sometimes the greatest act of love is learning to communicate in someone else's language, even when it's hard, even when it's unfamiliar. And she taught Daniel something just as important, that silence isn't the absence of communication. Sometimes our hearts speak loudest when our voices are still. On Margaret's last day, before she retired to spend more time with her own grandchildren, Daniel gave her a handmade card. Inside, he had written in careful letters, "Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." But he had also drawn 2 hands forming the sign for I love you. Margaret kept that card on her refrigerator for the rest of her life, and whenever anyone asked her about her years as a nanny, she would tell them about a little boy who reminded her that listening is more than just hearing words. It's about paying attention to all the ways a heart tries to speak. Sometimes she would say, the greatest kindness we can offer another person is simply this: the willingness to learn their language, whatever form it takes, because in the end, we all just want to be understood.